So welcome everyone to our second session. Last week, I'd like to begin our work here today with the Serenity Prayer. So please feel free to unmute yourselves and let's speak that prayer together today. Okay? You should be able to mute in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay. All right, so just as a reminder, we meet every Tuesday, 7 a.m. These sessions are recorded and then they are uploaded to the Recovery Bank's YouTube channel, so you can find them there. And if you missed last week's session, that's already there. So I just wanted to take a moment to review some of the content from last week before we move into the content this week. A couple of things I wanted to highlight. One of the things I talked about last week was how vulnerable our recovery can be when we are in a really stressful period of time. We've never been in this place before. The path ahead is very uncertain, very unclear. And part of the first 4 weeks of this program is really focusing in on ways that we can strengthen our resilience and cultivate a so that we can protect our recovery. So what's been really helpful for me is identifying for me, if I had to choose 4 qualities that might constitute what I call the 4 pillars of my recovery. If my recovery were a house or a structure that is supported by 4 pillars, or as someone indicated last time, you might think about these things as 4 walls. What are the 4 walls or pillars of your own recovery? And as we're moving along, I'm thinking about the challenge. We can use these pillars to kind of assess how we're feeling about our recovery. So for me, the 4 pillars of my system to my own growth and development ongoingly, to maintaining my most important connections and connections to my community, which for me means being able to attend meetings, even if they're through conference calls or virtually, as in a format like this. So I brought this up last time, and I just want to sort of circle back to it and just ask you to perhaps take some time to identify what your 4 pillars might be, and then to check in with yourself periodically and ask yourself, which of these pillars feels quite vulnerable for me? So last week when we met, all of these pillars felt really vulnerable for me. So in the time since I saw you last, I've become more devoted to my self-care and far more serious about my prayer and meditation time, because those were the areas where I was feeling a little bit fragile, a little bit vulnerable. One of the things that we know about stress and overwhelm So how do you accommodate that given where we're at? It might be by taking walks. It might be by pulling the the old treadmill out of the closet, or I brought my hand weights up into the main room of my home so that I can just grab them every once in a while, but really starting to rethink how you're taking care of yourself, how you're continuing to grow and enhance your recovery through your reading, through attending programs like this, whatever it is. And then, of course, how are you maintaining your connection to those people that really are supportive for you and to your community? I like to think about this in terms of the family of my choosing. These are people in my life that I can always count on to be a source of sanity, to be the voice of reason and logic, and individuals in my life who are not going to feed any kind of drama thinking, trauma thinking, or the way in which I might be catastrophizing things. I talked a little bit about this yesterday. I grew up in a family where catastrophe thinking was just the way that we lived. We lived out of this fear-based, high alarm, 911 mindset, which, as you might imagine, over time really begins to take a toll on one's cognitive abilities, one's physical health. And part of healing from that, for me, as close as I am to my family, part of healing that for me has been making sure that I have people in my life that I don't do that with. You know, things might be really difficult, but they don't catastrophize with me. Things might be really difficult, but they don't do drama talk with me or trauma talk with me. So I have 4 people in my life that I have put on what I call the board of directors of Christine's life. And these are individuals that I don't even necessarily talk with on a regular basis, but when I have something that's really critical that I need to take to the board, those are the 4 individuals that I will consult with. So when you think about connection and community support now, who are those individuals in your life that help to restore you to that place of sanity, that are not going to do catastrophe talk with you, and that you might identify as being on the board of directors of your own life? So just revisiting, what are the 4 pillars of my own recovery, and in what ways might they be a little bit fragile right now? And just keeping this, holding this in your mind with an awareness. I also introduced last week this image of resilience. And I talked about the fact that many of us have seen this in nature. We have seen the flower, perhaps a single blade of grass, coming up through concrete, expressing itself through what appears to be really impossible conditions. And I ask for you to think about those times in your life where life brought you to your knees, your absolute knees, and what it took for you to get up. Because if you're here, you got up. And to really start reflecting on those qualities, that you, resources that you possess, that your fortitude, and what those are, so that you have a really keen sense that you possess those capacities for resiliency already. And the more that you continue to grow them and cultivate them, much like you might build musculature in the gym. The more that you can cultivate your own resiliency musculature, the more you can begin to really trust within yourself that you have the inner resources to lean into, to call upon when the shit is really hitting the fan. So much of our life right now, again, unpredictable, overwhelming, uncertain. And if the forecast is accurate, it appears that we have not yet seen the worst of it. So spending some time each day developing the musculature for resilience is going to help all of us to better face what is to come. Last week, we looked at what are called the 5 C's of resilient coping. If you remember, calm, clarity, connection, competence, and courage. So when you assess your own level of resiliency, or you ask yourself, what does a pretty strong and resilient person look like? What qualities do they possess? These are the qualities. Calm. And if you remember, we talked about calm in terms of equanimity. It's that evenness of both circumstances. And if you remember, were really turbulent. When storms appeared, when the pirates invaded the boat, if there was just one person who could remain calm and steady, that was the individual that would help the entire crew to survive. So if you want to look down to the left-hand corner of your screen and just mute yourself so that we can decrease some of that background. I hear some of that background noise. Make sure everyone is, for now, is muted. Good, okay. So in that quote, if there's just one person on the boat who can be calm, you know, that person helps to pave our pathway forward, right? And I mentioned that I want to be the calm person on the boat. But to do that, there are 2 things that are really essential. And that is my capacity for resilience and my capacity for steadiness. And as we move through today, I'm going to introduce to you what that sense of calm really looks like in a more specific way. We also talked about clarity. We know that when we're stressed and overwhelmed, we really experience cognitive impairment. We're not thinking clearly. And I use the image of the very, very calm, clear water. You know, when I'm feeling cognitively strong and not overwhelmed by stress, my mind is sort of like that very, very clear water. If you've ever been near the water of the Caribbean, or even the waters of a very still pond or lake, and you dip your feet in and you look down at your toes and you can see everything. You know, you can see your toes in great detail. You can see the floor of the Caribbean or the floor of the lake you're looking into. Maybe you can see rocks or shells. You know, when my mind is at that level of clarity, I can see to the bottom of things. I have access to that part of my brain that helps me to discern, that helps me pave the best path forward. We talked about connection. When our resiliency is strong, we feel really connected. And I would suggest that connection might be the top C of resilient coping, because the strength of our connections is often what we dip into when we need to build that musculature, or whenever we start to feel that our recovery or our resiliency is compromised in any way. We talked about competence. Our competence, our ability to really trust in the things that we're good at, our ability to trust in our decision making, and our ability to be discerning is really strong when we feel resilient. And finally, we talked about courage. I am more apt to take risks, to change my life, to better my life, when I feel that I can trust in my own resilience. One of the things I've been thinking about in terms of courage since I last saw you was the role that vulnerability plays in courage. When you think about those times in your life where you took a really brave and courageous risk, think about this. Think about something that you did, an action that you took that you would define as brave and courageous in your life. Vulnerability played a really key role in that. You may not have been aware of it, but you opened yourself up to the possibility of failure. You opened yourself up to feeling very, very deeply. When I think about one of the bravest, most courageous things I ever did, I vividly remember the moment of my Nissan Sentra packed to the top with all of my belongings. Everything that was precious to me was packed in that car. And looking at my parents who were standing on the front porch and waving goodbye, and driving my car out of state to Charlottesville, Virginia, to start graduate school as a young woman who never even had her own bank account. And I didn't have any idea how I was going to make this work. I didn't know how I was going to afford my life. I had never lived away from home before. No one in my family or extended family had ever left this region. But I had my hands on the wheel of that car, and I knew one thing. I knew that I had to leave to save my own life. It was that critical. And that was all that mattered, is that I was leaving to save my own life. I didn't know how it was going to work out. I didn't know. I just knew that it would. But that was probably one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. I felt so much. I risked so much. There was so much unknown. It was like driving into a void, but I trusted. So there's a really important, the element of vulnerability is really important to courage. So what does that have to do with resiliency? I can tell you that your capacity for vulnerability is really compromised when your resiliency level is weakened or fractured in any way. So going to the gym and building resiliency musculature is really important for you to continue to take brave and courageous risks to change your life, to better your life. Because vulnerability, it's very difficult for vulnerability to exist when we are really overwhelmed, when we feel very very much in a weak or fragile state. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about the 5 C's and the role that vulnerability plays in your capacity for calm, clarity, connection, belief in your own competence, and your ability to be courageous. When we think about what's happening right now and we think about our own recovery, it's sometimes helpful to spend just a little bit of time thinking about what's being threatened, not only for us, but everyone around us. Because you might be noticing that people are losing their shit, that people are feeling exhausted, that their anxiety and panic is contagious, and we kind of have to protect ourselves from that contagion, remembering that calm is contagious too. So it's helped me a lot to really reflect on what is being threatened, because when these things are threatened for human beings, our default is to go into cave person mode. We will fight, we will flee, we will freeze and shut down when any of what I'm about to say feels threatened. It's obvious that our physical health is under threat right now. And we do have to take measures to keep our physical health safe. And the physical health of everyone we love feels threatened, and they know it. All right, so this is a real source of stress, fear, panic, anxiety for people. For many of us, our family structures, family ways of being, and our relationships feel threatened because we're living in a strange land when it comes to family and relationships. Many families are finding themselves now in a situation where they are together 24/7. And in certain family structures, with the exception of weekends and vacations, this may not have ever happened before. I've been waiting to hear about this, and I'm surprised that it's only come up this week. And that is reports of escalation in domestic violence and family abuse on the rise in these situations where families, where there is long-term invasive toxicity and dysfunction present. I mean, think about the families you know that don't have a program of recovery, that don't have any of these tools or skills. Families for whom there are children who rely upon the environment of school to be the only safe place they have access to, all together, living under the same roof. The healthiest family all together living under the same roof is going to feel some nuttiness. But what happens in those families where safety is a real issue? So our family structures are in the state of upheaval. In other cases, many of us are cut off from contact with our family. For those of us for whom the Sunday family dinner is a tradition, seeing my very, very young nephews on a regular basis. I haven't seen them now in 3 weeks. It's one thing to see people via this medium of Zoom, but it's very different to have that human physical contact, to be able to look people in the eye. You know, all of that is in a state of uncertainty right now. So that can feel like a real threat. For many of us, our financial well-being is threatened. This is a source of enormous anxiety and really can lead people into that primitive mindset. I have a family member who owns a pharmacy, one of very few places that are open and will remain open. And he's talked with me about the fact that 2 weeks ago, every single mask that he had in his pharmacy is gone. And he doesn't know if the masks were stolen by customers or if the masks were stolen by his own employees, right? We can become frantic in worry, deprivation, consciousness. Am I going to have enough money, enough food, enough masks, enough toilet paper? You only need to go to the local Walmart, Wegmans, wherever it is that you get your basic necessities, and go to the aisle where they store paper products. I was at Wegmans 2 weeks ago, and it was very early in the morning, and I was coming down the aisle where the toilet paper, there wasn't any toilet paper there, but there was someone who was unloading a big case of toilet paper to put out on the shelves. And the hostility and the negative energy of the people who were gathered around that woman who was stocking the shelves was really frightening to me, because I thought, here we are all together. You know, I think if we had bully clubs, there's a possibility that people would have started beating each other, fighting for what very, very limited toilet paper she had there in supply. So financial well-being feels really threatened right now. Are we going to have enough money, enough resources, enough food, things to keep us afloat? For many of us, our professional stability feels threatened right now. What is my professional life going to look like on the other side of this? Many people I know are really starting to think about, what does my business look like on the other side of this? I don't have a clear vision for that. And then finally, our national and global security also feels quite threatened. I think I mentioned last time that COVID-19 is inherently stressful. It's really important to know that fear and the fear around this is totally normal. In fact, I'd worry about anyone who didn't have some degree of fear about this. But anxiety and panic, that it can be a natural result of fear, is really fear that hasn't been tended to. So be careful whenever you start to feel that sense of anxiety and panic and overwhelm coming up. Be careful that you don't necessarily get on that speeding train. Just use the anxiety and the panic as a cue to remind you, this is fearful, and it is okay for me to admit to the fear. Every time I try to resist that this isn't scary, or I allow the fear to overwhelm me, or I numb myself, or become frozen to the fear, that is when we create a situation for anxiety and panic to arise. So there's something that's really powerful and freeing about being able to say, this is scary. I am not alone in feeling the fear that I'm feeling. And being kind of kind and tender and compassionate with myself about the fact that I am afraid. Just the mere act of doing that can help to diminish the degree of fear that you might be feeling. This all happened really abruptly. Many of us had to act really fast, had to make really quick, rapid decisions about every area of our lives. And again, because the path forward is unpredictable and uncertain, this can feel really stressful. Did I talk about loss last time? Does anyone remember?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
This might be one of the most important slides that I share today. Again, this is really comes out of a lot of the teaching that I was doing last week and a lot of questions that came up. So there's the fear, there's the anxiety, and then there's something else. This general sense of just not feeling quite right. This destabilization and a host of feelings that people can't quite define. And there have been a couple of articles that have arisen in the last week or so that have suggested that if you're feeling particularly off and you can't quite explain why, it might be because you're grieving. So this makes sense. There's a lot of loss, but let's dive deep into what that loss looks like. And again, when we can name what's happening, we can start to diminish the stress level, the fear level. So these are the kind of losses or the categories of loss that you might be feeling, people in your life might be feeling. First is defined loss, and those are really related to a lot of what I just talked about. I've lost access to my workplace culture, to my office. I've lost my routine. I've lost regular access to my colleagues. I've lost access to the Sunday family dinner. I've lost income. I've lost my work as I know it, or as I've known it for a very long time. There are these really clearly defined losses. You know what they are. You can list them. Then there's this category of loss that's really interesting, and it's really uncomfortable, and it actually has a name. It's called limbo loss. So limbo loss occurs when I'm not sure yet that I've lost. It's this really strange state where I'm kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. When we talk about limbo loss, we tend to think about it or to talk about it related to two categories of experience. One of the categories of experience is relational. This is when, for example, two people have been together for a long time, maybe in the context of a marriage or a long-term committed relationship, and they're wondering, should we stay together or should we part? And they're very intentional and very honest about this. Like, let's go through this period of discernment, maybe through a separation. Not quite sure if on the other side of this, we're going to stay together. That period of time where you're discerning, do I stay or do I go, is what we would define as limbo loss. It's really, really uncomfortable. Another example of limbo loss is when you're not feeling well and you have a host of tests done, but none of the results are in. And you have to wait. And it's all of that sort of torture that you go through in waiting. have I lost? Am I going to discover that I have COVID-19? Am I going to discover that I have a condition that within which I'm going to lose some aspect of my physical health? So limbo loss is when we're not quite sure whether we've lost or not. And many of us are feeling this now. And if you think back during times in your life where you had to wait to know, have I lost or not, then you remember what that was like. It's really uncomfortable. Anticipatory loss. Many of us are feeling this now. That is, I know I'm going to lose. It just hasn't happened yet. I know that my life is not going to look the same after all this. It just hasn't happened yet. Uncomfortable state. That's when you know the other shoe is going to drop. You know it's going to happen, but you don't know when, and you don't know what it looks like when it happens. And then probably one of the most difficult to define losses that we feel very, very deeply is a loss that I call the mourning of dreams. Many of you might have noticed that there are several parents posting on social media photos of their children who are supposed to graduate this spring, maybe going from middle school to high school, or graduating from high school, or even graduating their senior year of college. And those graduations aren't going to happen, or they're not going to happen in the way that I dreamed. You know, the long-held dream of the parent who has thought a lot about watching their son or daughter walk across the stage to receive their diploma. The long-awaited dream of the wedding that I planned that's supposed to happen on Saturday and isn't happening. The long-awaited vacation that we were supposed to take next month that's been canceled. The future that we imagined in our post-retired life, and we look at what has happened to all of our investments, and we realize that it's not going to happen, or it's not going to look the way we thought it was going to look. So as human beings, it's important to plan. It's really important and even healthy to project a future, really, because that motivates us along. That's an important thing to do. But it doesn't always turn out that way. And that's a loss. And there's a lot of grieving that's associated with that. I learned about the mourning of dreams in a book that I read a long time ago called Divorce Talk. And it was a book that was written by a woman, a sociologist, who was very interested in the way that individuals who were part of a marriage who divorced, what they understood to be the reason for their divorce. So what she did was she interviewed these individuals who divorced about why they divorced. And what's really interesting about her study was that each person had a very different story, not only about why they divorced, but a very different story about their marriage. So their talk about their marriage and their divorce was so radically different that you really understood why they divorced. They had very different ideas, very different expectations, very different dreams about what marriage was supposed to be for them. Dreams that they never articulated. So one of the most profound chapters in her book is a chapter called Mourning Different Dreams. And it's in this chapter that she shows that for many of these couples, they divorced, or what was at the crux of their divorce was that they each held very different visions for what marriage was supposed to be. Very different ideas for who you were supposed to be as my husband, or who you should have been as my wife. You know, this is how I imagined it. But if I never spoke what I imagined, if I never spoke what I dreamed about, how are we supposed to know that? And that in most of these cases, they didn't know. Neither individual that were part of the marriage knew what the other dreamed about. And so that the real pain of the parting was not about not being physically together anymore, but the deep, deep pain was the mourning of the dream that never happened, the mourning of the marriage that never was. That is a profound loss. And we can think about this in the context of our own lives. It doesn't have to be in the context of a marriage or a relationship. You know, what are the visions that you held for your life, that you hold for your life, that haven't come to fruition, and that perhaps won't come to fruition, or are going to manifest in a way that looks really different from what you dreamed about? And maybe in many cases, for right now, we don't even know what that vision looks like. We know it's going to be different, but we can't even fathom how it's going to show up. So there's a grieving that's associated with this. I was teaching a class yesterday, and one of the participants talked about how she feels very, very disconnected from what she called her lifeblood. And I thought that that was a really powerful way to describe. She said, I'm very disconnected. I was severed, really, really quickly severed. My lifeblood, my life force was severed in the sense that, you know, yesterday I was at the office working with my colleagues, and the next day I couldn't go back there. You know, on a Friday, my children were in school. By Monday, there's no school anymore. Like all of these things that sustained her life abruptly severed. And she feels very disconnected from that life force. And so the emotionality around that in the last week has been what she feels are very excessive, even outrageous swings between all of the stages of grieving. All of the stages of grieving. Rage and anger being most profound for her. And she said, I'm not a rageful and angry person, but I feel the rage and the anger. And there's so much loss for her. And she's not alone. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to share this slide with you about loss. To just know that it's there for each of you at some level and for everyone that you know. And that if you're kind of wondering why they're behaving in the ways they're behaving, or if they're not quite understanding why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, go to loss and maybe even engage them in a conversation about loss. You know, you might be feeling a lot of loss right now. The good news is that in all of this, we do have choice. And our choice really resides in two important things: our capacity for response and our capacity to make meaning. I want to read something to you that came from a New York Times article that was published on March 26th. And I believe the title of the article was "The Meaning of the Plague." And in this article, I believe the author is David Brooks. He writes about how important it is as a coping mechanism for us to start thinking about the deeper meaning of all of this. And I want to read you just a little passage from that piece. He writes, Viktor Frankl, who was writing from the madness of the Holocaust, reminded us that we don't get to choose our difficulties. And we don't. We do not get to choose our difficulties. But we always have the freedom. We always have the freedom to select our responses. And that's a freedom. I do not have any kind of control over what's happening. That can feel paralyzing. I can, if I want to, I can feel really, really jailed and held captive by that. But my freedom resides in this fact that I can't control that, but I do have the key. The key to my freedom is understanding that I know I can choose how I'm going to respond to this. He writes, meaning, what I make of this comes down to three things. The work I will offer during this time of crisis, the love I will give, and the courage and the vulnerability that I will show in the face of great suffering. Now think about that. The meaning that I give to this entire experience is going to be grounded in three things. The work that I offer during this crisis. How will you serve others during this crisis? For any of you who have been serving in some capacity, you might have discovered that your service is a sanctuary right now. It is a source of solace. It is a source of sanity right now. Every opportunity that I have to teach right now, I'm teaching. It's how I will serve during this time of crisis. So it makes the crisis meaningful to me in a positive way. How will I love? How will I love during this period of time? And really being clear about that. What expressions of love will I offer? And to whom? And what kind of courage, or will I show courage in the face of great suffering? This is particularly important when we think about people in our life, maybe children, preteens and teens, people in our life that are utterly terrified. And we know that in the face of their terror, which feels like great suffering for us, I mean, that it hurts to see that. But what kind of courage can I model for them and inspire in them right now? He writes that this menace that we face might be subhuman or superhuman. But we all have the option of asserting our own dignity, even till the end. So this menace that we face, we don't even know what to call it, right? This invisible virus, this menace that we face, in the face of it, we all have the courage in a really dignified way of asserting our power of choice, which is, I may not know you, I may not understand you, I may not be able to see you, but you are a menace. But I will not be enslaved to you because I have the power to choose how I'm going to respond, through how I'm going to serve during this crisis, through the love that I'm going to give, and the courage that I'm going to show in the midst of the suffering that's happening here. And he writes, I'm going to add one more source of meaning, and it is the story that we choose to tell about this moment. The story I choose to tell about this moment in time. It's the way that we tie our suffering and our fear to a larger narrative of redemption, our own redemption, and the redemption of the planet. And it's the way that I then go out and live that story for the rest of my life. The plague today might seem like a monster, but it is quite possibly giving birth to a better world. This plague might seem like a monster, but what if the story that I choose to hold about it is that it is quite possibly giving birth to a better world, to a better me, to a better version of myself, to a different and even better way of life. So there's a lot going on. This is a big article. This is just a very small snippet of this article, but I found it really profound. Okay. That I can't control what's happening, but I have the freedom to choose my response to what's happening in every moment. I can't control the way that other people are thinking, feeling, behaving, but I can control my response to how they're thinking, feeling, and behaving. That I have to start thinking about what all this means for me and really check in on the story that I'm telling about this and the story that I'm going to live forth as I move forth, that I'm going to carry with me as I move forth. And remembering that the meaning that you make of this, and you don't have to decide this now, but just know that you're doing it. You're already doing it. You're already making this mean something. But take solace in this really protective place and understand that the meaning you're weaving about this can be beautifully grounded in how you're going to serve, the love you're going to give, and the courage you're going to show in the face of great suffering. So that's a lot. I want to stop here, and I want to come back to all of you. And I would love to just open it up like I did last time. What here resonated with you? And that's how we'll bring this to an end. We have about 10 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Kelly and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Kelly.
Christine, the best way I could ever think thank you for being here this morning, saying what you said, and just being who you are. Tells me to get up and get out there, just like every day, get up, seek the kingdom, add to my spirit in a day, love and service, be helpful, take action, show God I'm thankful. That's the best way that I could ever thank you, is to get up. You've convinced me that it's almost like self-preservation. It is the most beautiful thing in all of this turmoil, but I'm going to tell you, I feel it and I know it, and the best way, again, that I could ever thank you is just to continue on, get up and go out through that day and give back to God. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Just practice social distancing and keep yourself.
Oh yes, I'm in the dirt and the leaves and the roots of the trees. I'm not around people.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alyssa.
Hi.
I'm a grateful recovering family member. Can you guys hear me? I have my headphones in, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you so much. There was a lot of messages here that I really needed to hear today. I especially liked when you talked about the board of directors in your life and who, helps you make decisions and things like that. And since I started recovery, I really replaced my board of directors with different people that I feel like have a clear vision and really want the best for me and have the same mindset that I do. And I think I'm just going to reach out to those people today and say thank you so much for being on my board of directors, and just, thanking them for their role in my life. And the other thing that really hit home with me was when you were talking about the people that were getting a divorce and the chapter in the book and why they got a divorce and how their pictures were so different of their marriage, and, mourning that loss of, what you thought you had, and I got divorced 2 years ago, so that part really hit home. And I had this picture for my life that I wanted it to look like, and it just didn't turn out that way. I mean, that's kind of like what it happens. And my sponsor always says, you have to mourn that white picket fence. And I feel like this talk right here really kind of like hit home with that I really need to kind of do that work and to be able to move on from that. So I just really appreciate you being here this morning, and thank you so much. Thanks for letting me share.
You're welcome. That that study taken from that book is really profound. And sometimes when we get that insight that we really need to mourn the dream that never came to fruition, even if it's been like many, many years since the divorce, it not only can bring you to a place of real completion with that relationship, but it often can help us reframe even our understanding of that person that we were married to in a way that could feel very, very compassionate. Like, wow, we just had very different visions of what this was, or what we wanted it to be, and it never was that. And I always ask, well, did you each know that of each other? And most of the time the answer is no. Yeah, so it's a very powerful kind of loss that has to be tended to. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Jim. I'm a drug addict and alcoholic.
Hi,
Jenny.
Hey, this is great. Thank you. I took a lot of notes. The one thing that really struck me is at the end, and it's about what's the story that I will tell. It's really filled me with a lot of hope. 'Cause I'm doing everything I can, It's not easy. It's not easy for any of us, but I'm looking forward to a good story and a good ending. I'm looking forward to a change in my life in a really great way. It has, so far. I get to spend a lot of time in the prayer and meditation stuff. So that I normally in my life is just go, 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 busy, busy, one foot in front of the other. But there's a lot of contemplation today. And it's usually pretty good. I have a meeting later with work, and I haven't talked to these guys in a couple of weeks. So this ought to be fun. See what's going on. Anyway, thank you, Christine. Thank you, everybody, for being up this morning and being part of this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I know you've been serving, and I know some of the ways you've been serving, and yeah, what story will you carry forward? We're in the process of formulating that, but if we can be intentional about it, we can make decisions about, catastrophe story. Is it going to be the story of drama, trauma? Is it going to be uplifting? Is it going to be a little bit of all of those things? I mean, in addition to being able to have control over how I'm going to respond to things, I'm the only one here that gets to hold the pen of the next chapter. Nobody else.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, Justin. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can hear me. This is my first time using this.
We can. Mm-hmm.
We can.
Oh, okay, great. What really struck me was those 4 pillars, because pretty much all of them have been devastated by what's going on.
Yeah.
But yet, as a whole, it hasn't deterred anything from my sobriety, which is really astounding to me. So I thought that was really fascinating because I never really put that into perspective before. And yeah, I actually had a scare. Like I went to T-Pals, which is an organization down here in Scranton for treatment services, and I wasn't feeling well. And so at the end of my session, they actually took me to the ER to get tested. And like I was relieved that I had bronchitis.
Yeah.
But I mean, I stayed home and I haven't been doing as much activity. This is the first time I'm trying to get real back into things and try out this method. I haven't left the house, so I haven't. That's not an issue, but I do live with my girlfriend who does have bronchitis, but she doesn't have any insurance or any way to pay for it, so that's another. It's just the financial burden is extreme, really extreme.
Yeah.
And that's I don't know, that's just really what's the main focus is. Just trying to look for jobs every day, and and it really distracts you from thinking about using or anything else when you're trying to better yourself. And also the C's. I consider myself a really calm individual, and I pride myself on that. And I'm working on the clarity one too as well, because I think that's actually the most important. Not just clarity on my part, but clarity on what other people's views are when they're addressing you. And so that's a really big one for me that I haven't heard brought up before. And I want to thank you for your time. This was excellent. This was.
You're so welcome. Were you in the class last week?
No, this is my first one.
If you go to the Recovery Bank YouTube channel, you can see the replay of last time if you wanted to go in depth on those 5 C's.
Okay.
Yeah, and know that we're here every Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. and that these are also recorded. This is recorded and that'll be on that channel as well if you wanted to review it.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And take care of yourself.
You as well.
And the next time we meet, and some of you, because I did a program at the Recovery Bank on the SCARF acronym. The SCARF acronym helps us to understand why we get triggered in the first place. That's the topic for next time. That helps you to understand you better, and it helps you to understand everybody around you better, especially when they're losing it. And if I can understand why you're losing it, I can better deal with you. I can better respond to you. Remember, that's your freedom. Your freedom. You hold the key all the time. You always have the freedom to choose your response. Okay. Shall we end with what? How would you like to end?
How about the serenity prayer, Christine?
Absolutely. Let's do the serenity prayer again. All right. Unmute yourselves. God,
God,
grant
grant
me
Grant
serenity,
me the serenity
the things I
to
can
accept
the things I cannot change,
courage to change
the
them,
courage to do the things I can,
and the
and the
wisdom.
wisdom to know the difference.
I'll see you next week.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Christine.
Christine.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.